ASML is certainly among the most critical and important businesses of the modern economy. They make the machines that make the microchips, which makes modernity go round. You've likely heard of TSMC before, the Taiwanese behemoth at the center of Chinese geopolitics, and how these guys are in fact those who make these amazing microchips. It is true, but they make them on ASML machines, and that's the critical point to take home. The insane complexity of ASML's EUV machine is impossible to fully appreciate, which is something we get into the podcast. But as well, if you refer to an earlier episode, I actually recorded with ASML's Senior Vice President of Technology, Jos Benschop, who himself makes the claim that ASML's EUV machine is the most complex thing ever made by man. And when words are overused, they really lose their meaning. But truly, ASML's EUV machine is definitionally unbelievable. The CTO, Martin van der Brink, has recently retired from ASML, and his cultural legacy really forms the narrative for Marc's book, with plenty of fun anecdotes, of course, along the way. Marc Hijink is the guest on this episode. He's a Dutch journalist and tech reporter for Handelsblad, and recently went down a 3-year journey with unparalleled access to ASML and produced a wonderful history of this phenomenal company. Among the many things you can expect in this podcast is a lot about the culture of ASML. What does it take to create a good culture? How do you maintain culture as an organization grows so rapidly? The serendipity of the life of ASML, and then, of course, all of the rich and wonderful anecdotes that Marc was able to accumulate during his time researching for this book. So refer to the timestamps to jump through to the parts of the episode that matter most to you. Marc is an absolute legend, so also buy his book. It's called Focus, and learn about this magnificent company as well. And for the love of microchips, leave a 5-star review for this podcast on Spotify and on Apple, which of course the very phones and computers which these applications are run on top of rely on ASML's EUV machine. There is another form episode of this very podcast that I would like to draw your attention to as well. It's with Chris Miller, who wrote the definitive book on the geopolitics of semiconductors. It's called Chip War. A link to that is also in the description, but my hope is that with these 3 episodes consumed together, it would make for a decent intro into the wonderful world of microchips and as well ASML. And here is the great Dutchman himself, Marc Hijink.
Well, I kind of stumbled upon ASML and discovered that it was a company that was like a Dutch high-tech fairy tale. And for me, it's great to have the opportunity to tell this story and to research it. And sometimes I have to pinch myself to see that I got access to such a.
It's really cool.
To such a big and important company that also gave me the opportunity to also to not only speak to their leadership and to the employees, but also do research within their supply chain or talk to criticists or external experts, so I could create a holistic view of the company.
Yeah,
they really wanted to. They asked me to make an objective, to create a mirror for the company, so they could look themselves in the eye. And the funny thing is, the company is so much focused on just building one machine. It's like a one-trick pony, a very expensive one-trick pony, but it also kind of loses attention for all the other things happening on the side. Geopolitics was one of them, but also their logistics was somehow sometimes a mess, and also the way they handled HR was a huge problem for the company.
So they wanted you to create a mirror for them. Did anyone not like the reflection that came through your book?
Oh, nice way of putting it. I think in the end, ASML is a company that really appreciates an honest view. So they gave me all the freedom just to talk to everybody. And they never tried to intervene or to steer the conversations I had. Which was also a thing I had to pinch myself in the arm for. Because they really appreciate an honest view and a holistic view. And I guess... that's part of their engineering culture as well. So it doesn't help the process to be polite to each other. You just have to to catch it to make a deadline. You have to be fully aimed at being blunt and creating the least bit of latency, which means you have to be direct and to be honest with each other. And that's the thing I wanted to emphasize in my book as well. And I think that was perceived well at ASML, so to speak.
Oh, I'm happy for you that they received it really well. And it must also be quite cool that as a Dutchman, as a proud, honest, blunt Dutchman, you got to report on, the biggest, baddest company that your country has created in modern history.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that a lot of Dutch people actually don't realize how important ASML is for the rest of the world. So that was one of the problems that the company was quite obscure because its technology is so complex and
and people just take for granted that a semiconductor is just another component in their electronics.
Yeah, but the ecosystem is depending very much on ASML, and also the ecosystem of ASML is growing with the company. So the whole supply chain has to accommodate ASML, and ASML has to accommodate the growth of the semiconductor industry. So kind of the whole manufacturing industry in the Netherlands is leaping forward, and that has that took a while for the penny to drop in, for example, in The Hague, where the Dutch government resides. But about a company that started out very small in a very small town, and now is a huge multinational and the kingpin of the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, little town of Vleerderhoven.
Yeah, Veldhoven. It's hard to pronounce, but it's Brabant, so that's a southern part of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is not really a huge country, but it does have a north and a south, and ASML is just like below the rivers in the middle of the country.
And so they were a little spin-off from Philips, the great Dutch company, and headquartered in this little town that was completely flattened in World War II. And then now the entire town is built around ASML, right?
Yeah, if you look back on the first 40 years of ASML, the company now is just celebrating its 40th anniversary. Then you see that ASML kind of took over the role that Philips used to have in the city of Eindhoven, which is very near to Veldhoven. So Philips used to be huge, but it has diminished now. Yet its spin-off, ASML, has grown into this huge company, which is, I think, the most valuable technology company from Europe, and the biggest and most important company in the Netherlands. And it really has altered the city of Eindhoven. They really have to adapt to this pace of growth that ASML is experiencing right now, because the semiconductor industry is expanding worldwide, especially in Asia, but also in Europe and in the United States. And because ASML is building the machines, the chip machines that are used to, create semiconductors that are in all devices, then you have to adapt its growth pace to the worldwide expansion. And that really is putting a lot of stress on Brabant, as we call the region in the Netherlands. And they have to invest a lot to accommodate ASML's growth.
So how many new people are joining, say, every quarter since 2020 for ASML?
Well, if you look at the pace of growth of the number of employees, you see the expansion that ASML is about doubling every 5 years in general. That has been the case over the last decade. But during COVID, the number of employees has grown even more rapidly. And I think per quarter is you could say that ASML at its peak during the chip shortage was expanding at a rate of like 800 people per month, which is crazy for a company that size. And they're also expecting to double within the next 5 or 6 years. So the company will have I think a total a number of employees of about 70 or 80,000, which of them, half of them would be based in the Netherlands.
And very few of them are actually Dutch themselves. Like, it's such a multinational melting pot.
Yeah, it is a melting pot. And if you look at their number of nationalities, I think there's over 140. Of course, there's still a lot of Dutch people who join ASML, but if you look at their worldwide expansion, the company's growing to be less and less Dutch every year, which makes sense because the semiconductor industry is just, it's a global business, and ASML is acting accordingly, you could say.
So if the company is growing less and less Dutch over time, although it's in very much sort of Dutch heartland, and it's famously a small little Dutch spin-off, and the Dutch culture is quite a strong, dominating type of culture. How does ASML maintain a culture, or does it sort of just constantly change over time? And how significant is their culture to sort of their success?
If you look at these first adventurous years of ASML, they had this sort of cowboy attitude. They really wanted to penetrate this tough, crowded market of lithography machines. And the way they, for example, they joined a beauty contest of one of the semiconductor manufacturers in the US called AMD, which is now a very big company that is a competitor of Intel. And to gain a contract to deliver and ship these machines to AMD, ASML had to join a beauty contest and compete with other lithography machine manufacturers to see who had the best device. So that's the way they... So they installed one machine there in the US, and when they just booted it up, it seemed that machine was running okay. But then the engineer saw that the linear motors in the machine weren't working properly. So they had to sneak out and send a message to Veldhoven. Okay, please bring us new spare parts. We really need this. And without telling AMD, they snuck into the factory secretly at night, and they changed these motors just to win this beauty contest. And they never told AMD. So it's a bit of an improvising
law.
Yeah, that's just the way. We have this one shot. We have to take huge risks, and we have nothing to lose. And I think the nothing to lose mentality was a thing that really determines ASML's DNA in the early days. And you see that has been growing throughout the history of the company, and it still is very much part of its culture right away. And maybe it's typically Dutch as well, because the Dutch are not really fond of hierarchy, so they're really used to just doing what they want to do. They're usually very blunt and direct, and which is a good good match with the engineering spirit. So for ASML, that went quite well.
Do you think that culture is something that is created at the top and then trickles down?
If you look at ASML, the culture was always an engineering culture, very direct. If you build products that are complex like lithography machines, then you really have to be very direct and blunt and point out failures or faults or errors in the design. Otherwise, you'll have a huge problem when a lithography machine, somehow gets jammed when it's in a chip factory, because then it's really expensive if the machine is paused.
But do you think that, say, the leadership, even in an engineering culture, it's the leadership who are making the decisions, who are the ones that drive whatever that culture becomes?
I think if you look at ASML, the culture was always in the engineers, and the engineers ended up in leadership. So one of the people at ASML that was really like a driving force to push this technology further and further was Martin van der Brink, and he was the CTO, and he just recently stepped down because he's on his pension now, and Martin van der Brink has this really rough style. You could call it really a confronting way of meeting people and trying to
You mentioned earlier this Dutch culture might be very direct, or at least engineering culture, very harsh, kind of direct. And it sounds like from what you wrote about Martin van den Brink and maybe what his reputation is that he exemplifies that kind of completely. What are some examples of Martin van den Brink's sort of management style that lead to those sort of anecdotes?
Well, I think he likes to take people out of their comfort zones. So when you walk up to him, he usually tries to throw you off your feet. I don't know if that's the right expression, but for example, I spoke for this book. I spoke to him 5 or 6 times, and we went through the history of ASML. But I remember the first time we met, he said, "So why are you writing a book about ASML? There's already been written some books about ASML," which is true, because but it was about the first decade, which was quite a long time ago. But it was just his way of challenging me, and this challenging culture is very much part of his strategy to get people to
drive high performance.
To drive high performance, yeah, but also, for example, he's one of the people that always emphasizes that ASML, even though it's a market leader, should be humble. So it should be a company that doesn't try to make as much profit as possible. But the aim of the company, of ASML and the company, is to keep the ecosystem alive and prosperous, and to add value to the few customers they have, these few huge chip manufacturers. And because ASML is like almost a monopolist, and especially a monopolist on EUV machines, it might be easy to think, well, we can ask or do anything because all our customers are very dependent on us. And Martin van der Brink has always been, well, some kind of preacher, and saying, well, we need our customers to be successful, otherwise we will fail as a company. So when I asked him what his thoughts were about the threats that might impact ASML in the long term, he didn't mention geopolitics or growth or whatever. He said success is the biggest threat of ASML.
Well, that's prophetic.
Yeah, that's because he's afraid that people might become lazy, or somehow, expecting to be successful all the time, and then you create an opportunity for competition, of course.
Do you suspect that now Martin has retired and his cultural influence is left behind, that things are going to change?
Of course, he's retired, but he stays on as he'll keep advising the company for about a couple of days a week. So it's very hard for him to leave the company as a whole, and his experience is widely appreciated. But especially his spirit is widely appreciated. I think the fact that Martin is leaving certainly has an impact, but he has a lot of people around him that have been trained and are used to his approach. And some people, they call themselves like mini Martins, so they are they're cut from the same cloth. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So his blueprint as like a cultural leader will maintain in the way that they work.
Yeah, my expectation is that will definitely happen. But maybe the biggest risk of changing the culture of ASML is the rapid growth of the number of employees. So a lot of people join the company, but they didn't have the experience of the early days on this cowboy culture. So they might have to be trained to be cowboys again, but also to be not too challenging, which is also part of ASML's culture. So they also always include, well, you have to be challenging to each other, but you also have to collaborate and care about your colleagues. But that's like a conundrum, because you can't do all these three things together.
Yeah. You mentioned that Martin van de Brink sort of prophetically said that success might be the downfall of ASML, and you also suggested that they're monopolistic when it comes to the EUV machine, the highest end of chip manufacturing. I mean, being that they are essentially a monopoly, it's the ultimate success. You know, how realistic is the threat of competition to them at this stage, from your perspective?
I think there's always a chance that ASML will have a new competitor. And for example, China is spending lots of capital in creating a competitor that might be an alternative for ASML machines. Since ASML is limited to ship these most advanced machines to China, it becomes like a push for China to create its own tool set, to create its own lithography machine. And there's a lithography manufacturer in China called SME, and yet they're about 10 years behind ASML, 10 to 15 years. But if somehow the Chinese fabs are forced to use SME equipment, then SME gets more research money, and they can get the chance to improve and to learn and to build more advanced machines. So restricting ASML in China might actually create a competitor in China. And that's the thing that ASML is always worried about. Yet they have to they have their strategy to out innovate. So they just spend more money on R&D. If you look at their, I think last year they spent about 4 billion euros in R&D, which is huge, especially for a Dutch
Amazing.
company.
Yeah. Regarding the geopolitics of ASML, There was a book by Chris Miller, which came out explicitly about this a few years ago, which I'm sure you...
Chip War, yeah, excellent book. Excellent
exactly.
book. Yeah.
So in your own words, could you explain to the audience and to me why ASML is a globally significant company?
You could describe ASML as a supplier of the most important machine you need to build these advanced semiconductors. And these are the chips that you could find in your smartphone, especially the newest one, but also in the AI chips that companies like NVIDIA make. So that makes these devices ASML produces the most crucial element of chip technology.
How you sort of mentioned earlier regarding culture and Martin van der Brink that he didn't see the sort of geopolitics to be a threat to ASML, but clearly now it is. Just culturally, for this massive company, largest company in the Netherlands, largest tech company in Europe, huge multinational melting pot in Vlederhoven, how does the culture think about, how does ASML think about just how geopolitically significant they are? Like, how does that affect their day-to-day from what you could observe?
I think they prefer to focus on their technology. And, of course, the geopolitical attention has pushed the company into the spotlights, which is, well, you could call that a compliment, because the world's now realizing how important ASML is for this whole supply chain of semiconductors. But in Veldhoven, they're very much inclined to focus on the technology, because they're it's so complex. You don't need a distraction from the outside world. So it's nice to know that everybody now understands what company you're working on, but the daily work is still very much about technology, which makes sense because it's such a complex machine.
Yeah. I mean, perfect segue. Speaking of the complexity of it, Jos Benschop, who's an executive at ASML, said that, in his opinion, it's the most complex machine ever created by human beings. In your own words, could you explain why the EUV machine is so complex and like all the magical sort of components that go into it?
Well, I think we would need a few podcasts to explain how the machine actually works, but I could just...
but I'm just looking for some flagrant language, Mark. You don't have to give us the hardcore tech breakdown.
Okay, because it took ASML like 15 years and over 15 billion euros to get this machine working, which is a huge number, and it's a crazy risk. So EUV, it's the abbreviation for extreme ultraviolet light. And if you dive into a lithography machine, it's basically a copier. So, and just like a regular copier, it uses light that's been reflected throughout a couple of mirrors, and not onto a piece of paper, but onto a silicon wafer. So this big shiny disc with a photosensitive material on it. And the structure that it's been printed upon has these really fine lines. So you get this this fine-grained structure that's used to build transistors, the transistors that power your chips. The more transistors you cram on the same surface, the more powerful and advanced and energy efficient the chips will be. But for these lines to be very thin and very fine-grained, you need the typical light source would have been the DUV machine, which is deep ultraviolet light, and it has a wavelength of 193 nanometers. So, and then 1 nanometer is 1/1,000,000th of a
millimeter.
Of a millimeter. Yeah, that's crazy.
Impossibly small amount.
Yeah.
If you look at your fingernail for 3 seconds, I think it grows 10 nanometers, something like that.
3. It's actually one. It's at least my nails. They grow 1 nanometer per second.
Insane.
So it used to be 193 nanometers, but EUV, so the extreme ultraviolet light, is a light source that well, it's like a fine liner. So it has a dimension of 13.5 nanometers, which is much finer. So you can create more advanced chips. But this extreme ultraviolet light doesn't exist on this planet. So you have to. It only exists in the corona of the sun. I think that's the nearest place you can find it in its natural way. So you have to create this light, and the way ASML is doing that, it's using thin droplets, so really small droplets, and it fires a laser, a really heavy laser onto this droplet, and this droplet is being exploding into a plasma, and the plasma generates a light, which is projected into the system, then reflected throughout a couple of mirrors. I'll get into the mirrors later because that's totally crazy. Then it gets projected throughout these mirrors, reflected on a mask with the chip structure, and then it hits the wafer, which is moving very rapidly. Okay, now back to the thin droplets. So to create a plasma that's strong enough and to have enough light to actually write the structure on the disk, you need the thin droplets to be hit with a laser 50,000 times a second. So that's it's not even rapid. It's like a what do you call it? Machine gun.
Yeah. Impossibly fast.
It's impossibly fast, and also the laser that's been used. You could compare this power with a jet engine. So when a fighter jet is taking off, that's the same kind of same amount of power or energy that's needed for the laser. And
wow.
It's not a thing that ASML builds itself. So it's being built in a German town called Ditzingen, and by a company named Trumpf, and they really built these crazy lasers with like 3 amplifiers in a row to have enough power to hit that thin droplet. And this was the hardest part of the EUV machine, actually building that light source that never existed before. And if you look back at EUV, it's a technology that was developed or examined and experienced with in Japan and the US and also in the Netherlands, but to actually industrialize it, to create it in a machine that can work like 24/7, every day throughout a year, that took quite a long time. And that was the biggest challenge for ASML to succeed. But let's go to the next step of the EUV machine, which is the optics system. So that's also a German thing, actually, or a co-invention of Zeiss, and that's a German company, and ASML. And the optics system uses lenses that are very flat, because the smallest, what's the right word? Smallest error. It's the smallest bump, even an atom high, would create problems during chip manufacturing, because the margins are very small in this kind of machine. So Zeiss really has to outperform itself to create the flattest mirrors you can imagine. So,
isn't it the case it's the flattest substance humans have ever created?
I think they use the example of if you were to stretch, or if you were able to stretch this mirror to the size of Germany, so like 1,000 kilometers across. I think the biggest bump on the mirror would be less than a hair high, so it would only stand out a hair high, which
incredible.
It's incredible. But I like their other example even better. That if you were to shine a laser on it and you could point it at the moon, you could actually hit a golf ball on the moon. It's so its accuracy is accuracy, yeah. So
yeah,
its
totally.
accuracy, yeah. So its accuracy is tremendous, and so for this book, I traveled around the world and also traveled around the main suppliers of ASML's machine. And Zeiss had to build this huge laboratory to measure these mirrors. They have these huge tubes or canisters where they create a vacuum that's like in the EUV machine, and that's where they measure their mirrors. Because if you can't measure it, then you can't build it. That's the German approach. And it took, I think, 3 or 4 years to build these machines, to measure them. And it also took ASML like 1 billion euros to invest in Zeiss to be able to create these mirrors. Wow. Yeah, it's
such an appetite
crazy.
for risk.
Yeah, and I think the appetite for risk is mainly a natural thing for ASML, because that's the way the company succeeded and survived its first decade when it was on the brink of collapse a couple of times.
Right.
So yeah, there's a huge appetite for risk, but they're not being riskful per se. It's just if you want to build machines that are gonna add value in 10 or 15 years time, then you have to look ahead.
You have to invest now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really a thing about focusing. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Name drop in the book there. Nice one.
Yeah.
So the purpose as well of all of these extremely complex parts working together is just to print more fine and narrow lines onto a silicon wafer. And so they had deep ultraviolet, then they had extreme ultraviolet. What is the next adjective for the next machine that they're building? And what is their projection for how accurately they'll be able to print onto silicon?
The latest machine they're building right now is called High-NA. So that's basically that's the EUV machine, but with an improved set of mirrors called High-NA. And that machine is the first one has just been put together in Veldhoven, and it was nice because for the book I traveled along all these suppliers and ASML factories, and were building like these components, these modules. And last month I got the opportunity to look at it. All the pieces combined, all the pieces of the puzzle put together, and then you end up with a machine that's 40 meters long. I think it's 5 meters wide, and it's also 5 meters high. So it's massive, and it costs about 400 million euros. So if you look at what can it do, then maybe we should talk about the nanometers that chip manufacturers use and the actual nanometers on the chip itself.
Nice.
Because
that sounds good.
Yeah, because there's a difference there. If you look at, for example, companies like Intel or TSMC, they say they're working on 2 nanometer chips, but that's just a marketing phrase. And in real life, if you were able to look at these lines, you could tell that they're usually 20 to 30 nanometers apart from each other. So there's still a lot of room to grow. But if you look at that, 20 to 30 nanometers, then the latest machine ASML is producing is capable of improving that by by three times or even 5 times, which means that there's still room for this lithography machine to make even more fine-grained, narrow-lined, and to create more advanced chips, especially for AI.
Just one more moment to linger on the complexity of the EV machine. So you mentioned the tin that shoots across hundreds of times per second, and then
thousands of times
per second, and then it's heated up by that zap from that big laser to, and I don't know if my notes are incorrect here, but to 40 times the degree of the sun's surface. And then that light through the tin is bouncing off and printing onto a wafer. And I remember some details as well, how they have to keep the temperature inside the machine to such a narrow bandwidth. And there are these gyro machines that are constantly balancing the silicon wafer so it's remaining perfectly level.
Yeah,
Anyway,
what is also impressive is the speed, because the wafer is moving rapidly in these latest generation of machines, and it's like accelerating like a Formula One car, but even way faster. And all these small movements have to be predictable, so you can adjust the mirrors to it, and also the mask. So where the structure is printed on is moving not at an even faster pace. It's like a copier gone wild, and it still produces these tremendously impossible small lines. So from a technology point, it's really it's the pinnacle of innovation.
And just to round off all the complexity of it, and this is something Jos Benschop was really trying to emphasize when I spoke to him, it was that creating this machine, yes, is an absolute marvel. But what he's more impressed by is its ability to work day in, day out, 24/7. And so it's sort of durability and reliability. Which is something you hear echoed a lot when Elon Musk is talking. Creating a prototype of a really nice car is hard, but it's way easier than reproducing that car at scale.
If you look at the machines that ASML built in the early days, I think most of them are still running after two decades, and these are machines that are lithography machines that are very useful, for example, creating chips needed for EVs, for electric cars, and they call it their thrift shop. So they still get these machines from the early days back, and they upgrade them and repair them and send them back to the fabs, and because there's still a lot of demand for these mature systems, as they call it. And because I think the number ASML uses is that more than 95% of all the machines they ever made are still being used from day to day, which is crazy, because that makes it an investment that pays off several times. But you could compare to, for example, the aviation industry. So the way you build a plane is quite similar to the way you build a lithography machine. So ASML also, like Airbus or Boeing, has a huge supply chain where it sources these modules, and then it puts together the system in its own factory. So it's the designer, the architect, and it's the assembler. So it puts it together, and it does. It also does the servicing, which takes like daily care. Because if you just would let a machine run and wait, and never service it, it will stop working within a couple of weeks, and it become useless. So it really has to, like a plane, which is attended to every time it lands, and then service engineers check the plane. That's similar to how the lithography machine is being serviced.
Yeah, it's a neat analogy, because I suppose that's so rare. What about the software component of all of this? So clearly, some of the best hardware engineers in the world are working at ASML. But is it also the case that some of the best software engineers are working there to build these systems that are calibrating the machine and constantly balancing the gyro and all of these smaller details?
Yeah, without software, this machine would be useless, because there's so much power and so much. You mentioned a temperature, for example, but it's just one thing. There are a lot of circumstances that change during the process, even in a clean room. So if temperature is one thing, but also air pressure or humidity or vibrations, earthquake, for example, especially in Taiwan. So there are a lot of factors that are that have an influence on the chip manufacturing process. And the only way to handle that is that you need to write massive amounts of code to create all the right adjustments for all these circumstances. Yeah. And if you look at, for example, at a wafer, a chip manufacturing is like adding layer on layer. And every time a layer is added, you need to, of course, have the lithography process, print the pattern on the disk. But you also have to, etch the machine and have all these chemical processes and put the wafer in ovens, which kind of changes the wafer itself, and it gets warped. And all these things have to be measured. So when a wafer enters the machine again, the lithography machine again, it has to be measured. It creates huge amounts of data, and the machine has to be adjusted to that to keep the focus right. So it's very much a software game. And the only way to control that is to hire the best software people you can find.
Oh, man, it's incredible. What are the salaries of these types of guys? Say not the top executives, but, a guy who's in his early 30s, super well educated, clear performer.
So usually the salaries at ASML are like 10 to 20% higher than other companies in Brabant. Which makes it a very attractive employer, of course. Yet, you also mentioned leadership. The leadership of ASML makes quite a nice amount of money, but compared to, for example, the peers in the US, it's quite modest.
Interesting. So how then does ASML recruit the best software engineers in the world when they might be able to just go, I don't know, work at Google or Meta or OpenAI and make way, way, way more?
I think one of the attractions, no, that's not the word, one of the nice parts of ASML? No, help me out.
Attractions is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
One of the appealing factors?
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thanks. So I also visited San Jose, which is like ASML's division in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of competition from big technology companies. Tesla, Google, Apple, you name them. They all pay extremely well. They might pay better than ASML in the Silicon Valley area, but the appealing factor for a lot of engineers to join ASML is that they can actually work on revolutionary technology, and not about building consumer technology or developing a new filter for Instagram or for TikTok. So they as they use their catchphrase, they're changing the world 1 nanometer at a time.
Nice.
And so for a physicist, it might be more of a appealing factor to work at ASML compared to a consumer-facing company.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And if you could say on a pie chart, put the number of employees into different sectors, you mentioned, I think earlier, 8,000 new employees per month at one stage. 800. Sorry, that makes that makes more sense. But nonetheless, 800 is a huge number. That's 200 new employees a week. So
that's an impossible pace, because all these new people have to be trained and to have to enter the company, have to, as I describe it in the book, land on planet ASML. So it's mind-boggling. They can't manage their growth in that way.
And they're producing less than 1,000 units per year. So on a pie chart, each sector, where is all this new growth going to? Is it the case that the engineering teams are so huge? Or are a lot of these people managing, say, marketing, sales, the hospitality of running the park, the legal side of things, etc.? Or is it still the case that most of them are going into the engineering side of the business?
Well, if you look at ASML as a company, it's growing rapidly, and so you're right. They don't produce as many machines as you might expect from a almost $30 billion revenue company. But these machines are very expensive and very hard to manufacture. So you need a lot of hands to put them together, and you need a lot of minds to think of the new generation or to solve the problems with the existing generations of machines. So that's the way ASML is expanding. And it also is expanding in the countries that are investing in their own chip technology now. So, for example, the US and Europe, they have this CHIPS Act, these CHIPS Acts, these subsidy plans to support new fabs in the desert of Arizona or in Magdeburg in Germany, and these are all like huge factories that need service engineers from ASML as well. So you see a lot of expansion also on the surfacing part. Yeah,
right.
So ASML is expanding worldwide, not only in the Netherlands.
When we spoke last year, you said that offshoring the Taiwanese chip production at the same scale in the US was impossible. Do you still think that?
Yeah, because the TSMC, which is the biggest foundry in the world, based in Taiwan, is, of course, it's building these fabs in the US, but they're very they're small or little, or producing less wafers compared to all the fabs of TSMC in Taiwan. And it's very hard to run a factory. And you see that TSMC has postponed the start of their first chip fab in Arizona for quite some time, because they're having trouble just getting along with the American work ethos.
Right. So it's a cultural thing.
It's a cultural thing, but it's also a thing about having access to talent. And if you see that the educational system in the US is, well, it's not producing enough or producing enough technology talent to actually be working in these chip fabs.
Interesting.
So the US has a problem.
So, aren't the people of TSMC, the employees rather of TSMC, aren't they motivated to just take a huge paycheck, move to America, and then recreate what they did in Taiwan, remove all of that geopolitical risk from the table?
I don't think they can be lured by just a paycheck. It's a cultural fit, of course, and because if they were lured with paychecks, then they probably wind up in China, which is offering even more, sometimes 5 times the amount they can make in Taiwan.
That's amazing.
But if, of course, TSMC is adjusting to this new era in geopolitics, and so it is building advanced fabs and even more advanced fabs in the future. But it's keeping its best technology for itself. So that's a way of, well, you could see it as an insurance policy. As long as the world is depending on the fastest chips on Taiwan, then it's worth protecting Taiwan from a possible invasion from China, for example.
How does ASML think about the fragility of their small client base? In my notes here, I've got that 60% of ASML sales come from just 3 to 4 companies.
Yeah, this is typically a thing of the business-to-business market. ASML is depending on just a handful of companies, very large companies like TSMC, Intel, Samsung, SK Hynix, also SMIC from China, and of course Japanese companies and Micron, you name them. These are companies that build chips, and when as long as the global demand for semiconductors or chips is growing at this present pace, it doesn't matter for ASML who's actually buying the machines, because it's just this economic law that somebody will produce the chips that are necessary. And even, for example, that might be a risk that if Intel somehow falls behind or doesn't achieve its very ambitious goals to lead the market again, then for ASML it's no problem that the global demand for chips is being fulfilled with by other companies. So that even in the end, if there were just only 2 companies, as long as they produce all the chips that the world needs, ASML can deliver the machines, and they're still commercially viable.
And focus, this has been a word you've very strategically dropped subliminally for the audience throughout the podcast.
Yeah. Oh,
Why
you
did
noticed.
you call the book Focus?
Okay. So there are hundreds of books called Focus, but I guess for ASML it makes sense because the machine itself and the lithography system is purely based on focus. So the image has to be projected very accurately. And also ASML has a focus on the long term. So its horizon is like 10 or 15 years ahead, its roadmap. And you also see the focus of ASML as a company that's just building one machine, one type of machine. So there's not a lot of distraction. And finally, there's also this focus of the world around ASML. So the geopolitical attention has pushed ASML in the spotlight. And for ASML, it's something they have to get used to. And they kind of pushed that away. They pushed away the outside world. And now, well, everybody knows the company.
Yeah, and having books written about them. Are you surprised by the demand for the book?
Yes, but reading it back, and I think also creating having the English version out and updating it, I realize it's a special story because there was a lot of serendipity. If you look at ASML, how it started, how it was lucky several times, how it took huge risks, so things could have turned out completely different. and for me, it was really special to also for myself to learn that it helps to focus yourself for a long time on one subject and really do a deep dive, because then it pays off, and people are somehow enticed by the adventure that ASML had for the last 40 years, and they're excited to hear what the company is about in the next 40 years. So, well, it's kind of a surprise, but it's also a reassurance that I picked the right subject.
And I think you actually just mentioned something really interesting that I'd like to follow up with you on. You know that I'm going to ask you about serendipity, but maybe if you could just reflect on the role that serendipity has played in the life of ASML.
Well, let's start with one of the lead figures in the book, or would you call it protagonist, or what's
sure?
Yeah,
the protagonist.
Protagonist. Okay, so if you look at the protagonist in the book, Martin van der Brink, the CTO of the company, when he started out at ASML, it wasn't a sure thing, because actually he went to his job interview at Philips back in '83, and he turned down their offer. So things could have gotten a completely different way, but then the director of Philips showed him the brochure of the new machine they were making, and in a new company. Wasn't named ASML back in the day, and Martin van der Brink kind of fell in love with the concept of a machine that's combining all physics, chemistry, mechatronics, you name it. All the fun science things are in that machine. So he fell in love with it, and he kind of started on day one and never left since then. So there was kind of a serendipity, and you see that throughout all the crazy stories in the book, that ASML has been depending on luck and also huge risks, and they had nothing to lose, and they still feel that way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Really cool. And obviously the huge risks have paid off. They're now a monopoly.
Yeah, and
the outcome doesn't get much better for a business.
And if I refer to your earlier question about culture, I think the biggest challenge and the biggest challenge of the new CEO, Christophe Fouquet, is keeping that startup feeling in a multinational company, without adding all these procedures and rules. Yeah.
How on earth is that possible though, when you bring in on 800 people a month, 200 people a week? It's impossible to feel like we're in a startup. You know, we're the most valuable company in the Netherlands.
Maybe that's a bit about. I think maybe it has to do with the Dutch culture, so that which is very much ingrained into ASML. That it's non-hierarchical. The awful word, non-hierarchical. So there's
flat.
It's a flat organization. So you're really supposed to challenge everybody, even challenge your boss or manager, because that's the way you get the fastest result and really create
super cool, like a true meritocracy.
Yeah, it's a meritocracy, and you also create a collective brain you're creating a collective brain that's kind of working in parallel, just like a human brain, and that's I think that's the thing that's driving ASML.
But how do you escape the bureaucratic slip where you end up just working under a professional manager, but not someone who can produce anything themselves?
I think the way people at ASML usually solve problems is just by shouting louder than the other colleagues.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, so it's really an exclamation culture. So there's a lot
but
of.
the thing is, which really stands out to me is that that might work if everyone was Dutch, or one culture, but they're not. It's
No.
It's
It's
Indians, it's Australians, it's UK, it's Brazilians, it's Mexicans, it's Spaniards, like all these people together. I mean, you throw a Swede into the mix, nothing would make a Swede more uncomfortable than sort of screaming your opinion at them.
Yeah, well, that's you make a good point there, because I interviewed one of their former HR bosses, and he used to work for Volvo in Sweden, and he also mentioned that it was the biggest difference he ever saw at a company. The Swedes really are very polite usually, not very direct.
They don't say what they mean. That's for sure.
Okay, and the Dutch are the opposite of that. So entering ASML for somebody who's not Dutch is kind of like landing on a different planet, and so the challenging atmosphere is very Dutch, but the new employees also, they get training, of course, and they also, the company has changed a bit since I think, start of this decade, so early 2020, they started using the triple C, so not only challenge each other, but also collaborate and care. And so these are like common values, you would say. But in
the things written down, it's like how people actually behave is the culture.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. I don't think that everybody would thrive at a company like ASML, because it's a very, very direct culture.
And so do they then have a high turnover, since it is such a direct, strong culture to join into? Do you find that a lot of people just immediately reject the idea of it, and therefore there's a higher turnover?
No,
I mean, 800 people a month is crazy growth. There must be people leaving at the other end of that.
Yeah, but okay, these 800 people, that was during the steepest, so their fastest period of growth, back in 21 and 22. So then they were hiring like crazy. Yet the company attracts a certain kind of people, so people that are attracted to the technology. True. And I asked this question. I also asked Martin van der Brink if he thinks that ASML's culture might change when he's leaving, as he just stepped down. And he said this company attracts a certain kind of people that like to solve a certain kind of problems, the real hard problems. So if you look at their turnover, I think it's actually pretty low. The latest numbers I heard were that 95% of the people are still working there after a couple of years. So which is high compared to other technology companies.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I suppose if you were just in Silicon Valley, a very talented software engineer, and there isn't much implicit meaning in, like you said before, creating a new filter for Instagram, you would just go to where the next highest paycheck is, an equity payout. But perhaps if a company like ASML can give the call to action, we will present you with the hardest problem in the world. You'll work with the smartest engineers in the world, and you might produce a pretty cool machine on the other end of it. It's significantly more compelling.
So you add more value to the world. I think that's the secret of the attraction of ASML. But also the thing you mentioned about all these other nationalities that have to grow accustomed to the Dutch culture. I think if you look at ASML abroad, so I visited their divisions in for example, Taiwan. And Asian culture, ASML is very refreshing. So in Asian culture, it's usually not very considered very polite to criticize your manager, but at ASML, people are really experiencing more freedom than in than local or national culture. So totally. It's kind of they get room to breathe now. So I think that's really a good thing that's attracting new talent to ASML. And if you look at the US culture, there's this kind of winner mentality in American corporate culture that you're not supposed to acknowledge your mistakes or present yourself at your most vulnerable, and that's something that ASML acquires. That you need requires. Sorry, ASML requires people to be honest of things they don't know, of their mistakes, so other people can help. And if you compare that to other companies from the US, then usually people have a hard time admitting they might be wrong or that they might miss a deadline. So there's this need to seem perfect. Wow, that's not an ASML thing.
That's nice. All right, Mark. Well, last question for you, mate. The role serendipity has played in your life.
Yeah, okay. Can you... I think this whole book was an act of serendipity. So I just... it came across my path. It was never my dream to write a book or to dive into the semiconductor industry. I just was a financial reporter, technology reporter for NSA, and ASML was one of the companies I covered. Then Corona just happened, and I happened to dive into the company even more. There was some kind of fit between me and the company, and then a publisher called me and said, "Hey, isn't there a book in it?" After I published a story in the newspaper, and so I reached out to ASML, said, "Okay, are you willing to do a book?" Okay, and just as we had just negotiated, nothing in writing, just explaining what I was going to do. Then the chip shortage happened, the geopolitical tensions started to happen.
Great timing.
And which was all a matter of serendipity. So I never planned this to happen.
Absolutely. And now it's produced, a book in itself is a great attractor for more serendipity. You do see already serendipitous things happening to you because you've now published the book, and maybe your profile is growing because of it?
Yeah, well, if I look into the future, it's kind of a blur now because I don't know what's going to happen. As a journalist, you're usually at the other side of the table. So I'm the one asking questions, and now I have to answer them. And I'm adjusting to that role because I realize that I think it's a nice story to tell everybody how a small country like the Netherlands, in a small town, build a huge company out of nothing or practically nothing. And for me, it was also, there's this serendipity. If you look back at ASML's history, that all the geopolitical tensions, the first seeds were planted way back in the 90s already.
Wow.
So it's not only a history of the company, but also a history of how geopolitics has changed over the years. And ASML or its technology has always been in the middle of it. So EUV was a American thing, and the discussion of licensing ASML the EUV technology was a very geopolitical decision way back in, what was it, 1999, even before the 2000s. But it was a different time. We thought the West had won, which turned out quite different.
Mark, dankjewel. Thank you for being so generous with your time. And
Okay.
I'll let you know when this is all ready to go.
Yeah, I hope I'll send you the WAV file. I really wish you luck trying to. I think this last part had a better energy. Don't you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Don't worry, I'll chop it up so it works well.
Yeah, okay. Well, good luck doing that, and thanks for your time and patience and helping me out.